Thank you very much. That's true. So hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. I know I'm standing between you and pizza, so I'm trying to be compassionate and stick to my time here. So for the last month or so, I've been touring around Europe, speaking about compassionate coding, humans, and technology. And this is my final stop, so this is a really special treat for me here to end with a bang and get to share this with you. So I live in San Diego, and normally I have to travel to places that are cold and rainy, so thank you for having me here where it's actually, the weather here is better than San Diego right now, so thanks again for that. I know you all thought really long and hard to make that happen. So let me start off by saying that I love technology. This is something people don't understand sometimes when they hear the rest of my talk. I've been coding since high school, so now it's been about 17 years since I've been coding. This is me at a hackathon a few years ago. I spent 10 years writing code professionally and leading teams at various companies in Silicon Valley. Here's a sampling of them. I also spent a lot of time teaching coding to children and adults, as well as mentoring technologists around the world, virtually and through my travels. So I love technology, and yet I also find that tech culture can be kind of toxic. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, one thing that I know is touched upon in another talk that I heard is stress and burnout. A lot of times in the technology field, we're working so fast and trying to keep up, and we often get stressed out. Just a few days ago, the World Health Organization recognized that burnout is actually a disease, a chronic condition, showing how our high-tech, even if you're not working in tech, you're using technology, and how that contributes to stress, workplace stress. It's like we never turn off. I also noticed that in tech, there's a serious lack of diversity. And even at this conference yesterday, when I showed up, I looked around and I saw that it sort of resembles this picture a little bit with a little more variety. And I've seen this no matter where I go across the world. And that's been something that's been troubling to me, because through my volunteer work, for example, I showed that I volunteer with a group called Black Girls Code. I see that people from all groups enjoy coding, and yet the representation in the professional fields doesn't reflect that. And that's not because these people aren't interested, it's got to be something else. So I kept digging. Another problem I saw in tech was building unethical products. Now this ranges from using user data in perhaps manipulative or inappropriate ways to building addictive products that maybe people stay up all night using, or separates us from other people. Or maybe building artificial intelligence that recognizes white faces but doesn't recognize darker skinned faces correctly, for example. These are unethical products. And then you also see ridiculous headlines like this. Programmers are having a huge debate over whether they should be required to behave respectfully to each other. Now, and the photo as well resembles that Lego photo. And this was about an open source community that tried to introduce a code of conduct, and there was a huge backlash, because how dare people tell us we have to treat people with respect. And like in any other industry, this would be seen as pretty ridiculous that you would fight against treating people with basic respect. But in tech, it's like, oh yeah, no, I don't think I should have to do that. All I have to worry about is the machines. I don't have to worry about the people. I've written about this on the website, about the website Stack Overflow. So who uses Stack Overflow, or has ever used Stack Overflow? Yeah, so I've actually never posted on Stack Overflow because I don't want a bunch of people telling me I'm an idiot. So here's an example of something that I saw in a group for women in tech. I've really been struggling this week. I've been in tears for most of it. And now I just got a snarky response on Stack Overflow telling me how easy the solution is, and that I need to learn how to debug my own code. I'm ready to throw the towel in. And this is from a woman just starting out in tech. Now imagine her going to this site that's supposed to be the go-to site for developers, and she's getting insulted and told that she's basically made to feel stupid. So anyway, all these things combined made me see that there's a lot of suffering in and around technology. So being the programmer that I am, I did some debugging and thought, I want to get to the root cause here. What's the actual problem with the tech industry? And I did some research and came across this. Programmers don't like people. Now, I didn't come up with this idea myself. It actually comes from a study from the 1960s done by IBM to find out what personalities are good at programming. This photo also comes from the study, and again, it's all men. Programmers are crazy about puzzles, tend to like research applications and risk-taking, and don't like people. Now, this study comes from 1966, so you may think, how is this relevant now? Well, IBM was a really influential company. It still is. And a lot of other companies copied the practices of IBM in their own hiring. So we've been using this model of developers as not liking people since the 1960s, and we haven't really updated it very much. But I have a more generous interpretation of this programmers don't like people. I think it's more, and I speak from my own experience here too, that code is just more comfortable. The human world is very fuzzy, very messy. There's no clear yes or no, right or wrong. In code, though, when we're dealing with binary situations, it's yes or no, it's on or off, it's 1 or 0. There's a right answer, there's a wrong answer. And there's something comfortable about that. And so I don't think it's that we don't like people. I think it's that sometimes we find more comfort in situations that don't involve those messy human scenarios. However, that said, I do think that there are some programmers who really don't like people. Here's some evidence to that. So I did a search of GitHub commits, and it's a little bit small, so I'll read them out. But they say things like, clarification for stupid users, added README comment for idiot user, throw error warnings at stupid user, morning hotfix for stupid users, be nicer for the stupid user, which is a bit ironic. So, this is not really a nice way to talk about any humans, especially the people we're supposed to be building the technology for. This relates to this problem of putting programming on a pedestal, so to speak, which is that sometimes we think because we have this superpower of being able to program, that we're up here, on top of the world, and all the lowly users and non-technical people, I don't believe in that term, non-technical, but, we kind of feel superior to them. And also even superior to beginning programmers. So there's this phenomenon of gatekeeping where we talk about, well, you're not a real programmer because you don't do X, Y, Z. Like, if you're not, writing an assembly, you're not a real programmer. Or, if you're just doing web development, that's not real programming. If you're just doing scripting, that's not real programming. There's all these ways of trying to make ourselves feel better than others, and it creates this hostile environment that's not very welcoming. We also have this problem of pattern matching and hiring. So this idea that programmers don't like people means that when we're hiring, we look for those people who don't like people, and we keep hiring people who don't like people, those people who want to code alone in a basement all day. And the thing is that balanced teams need more than that. We need to stop using these pattern matching techniques. So there's this idea that, hard technical skills are much more important than soft human skills. And one, I don't believe in this term soft skills because I think it's dismissive. But two, is this even true that these hard technical skills are more important? So to answer that, I asked the question, why do software projects fail? And I found a study that explored this. And it's not important to read all the details here. But one thing I'll point out is that the top problems listed there are all human problems. Changing or poorly documented requirements, poor team management, developer churn and loss of key talent. And only that last one there is potentially a purely technical reason, immature dev tools and application platforms. However, I would argue that even that last one is a human problem because who makes those decisions but humans? We decide what technologies to build, we decide what tools to use. These are all human decisions. And so, although our problems are human problems, we spend all this time talking about building a new framework or creating a new tool, and not necessarily the actual human problems underneath. So to me, I saw that all these problems that I have talked about, all software problems, are actually human problems. So, in the intro, it was mentioned that we've been talking about machines, and now we're going to talk about humans. But I think that even when we were talking about machines, we were talking about human problems. When you're trying to introduce a new tool, you have to build support among humans that you work with. When you're trying to learn a new language, you have to keep yourself, a human, motivated to do so. These are all human problems. So given this, what can we do to fix this? I would like to fix this because, like I said, I love tech and I want to be able to work in it and be happy and see other people be happy. So I would love to just burn it all to the ground and start fresh and start with people who do like people and technology and build it that way, but that's not very practical. So rather than do that, I thought, well, we can start caring more about people. Those of us already in technology can care more about people and hire other people who care about people. So for me, I found this perfect idea that I feel captures this, which is compassion. Now, compassion has a lot of baggage associated with it. Some people think it's only for religion. Some people think it's sort of a weak thing or whatnot. So I want to talk about what compassion is not. Compassion doesn't mean being fake nice, pretending everything's fine when it's not. Compassion doesn't mean ignoring logic at all. I actually find compassion is very rational, and we'll get to that. And compassion is distinct from pity. So pity is when you feel sorry for somebody, but that doesn't necessarily convey respect. Compassion starts with a foundation of respect for somebody, and we'll explore exactly what it means. So that's the difference there. So I've talked about what it's not. What is compassion? Well, I learned about compassion from going vegan, because being vegan is about having compassion for all life. I've found some great vegan places here in Athens. Here's the pizza that I got from Avocado Athens. Really good stuff. And through going vegan, I learned and studied about compassion. And I found this definition from the UC Berkeley Greater Good Science Center. So it's a very research-backed sort of definition here. Compassion is the feeling that arises when you are confronted with another's suffering and feel motivated to relieve that suffering. So in other words, I see compassion as being empathy plus action. So empathy allows you to understand what someone's feeling, but compassion adds this extra element of wanting to help that person feel better. So based on this idea of compassion, I started my company 3 years ago, Compassionate Coding, with a new approach to software development that seeks to minimize suffering for technologists, us, users, and the global community, so everybody affected by technology, by applying emotional intelligence and ethics. And I felt that those were important because emotional intelligence is the foundation for having compassion. You have to understand how you and others are feeling if you're going to work to improve that. So, Compassionate Coding is a company. It's a for-profit company. And the reason for that is it's good for business. Compassion is good for business. And it's not just me saying this. There's a whole book called Awakening Compassion at Work, written by 2 researchers, and they have extensive research about the bottom line benefits of compassion. For example, they share a study showing that compassionate business units exhibited better financial performance, and these units realized higher employee and customer retention. And it kind of makes sense, because if you treat people better, the people you work with and the people using your products, they're more likely to stick around. There are also personal benefits to you of growing compassion, because humans are built to be compassionate. They're also built to be cruel, but we have a choice in that. And the personal benefits of compassion are a greater sense of joy, more resilience when facing tough times, greater peace of mind, greater job satisfaction, and a lower chance of burnout, which, as we talked about, is a real problem. For more on this, I recommend checking out the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. So for the remainder of the talk, I want to talk about how specifically and practically compassion can change how we code, why we code, and who we code with. So to kick things off, I'll start with how we code. How does compassion affect how we code? So I'm going to talk about some actual code. So here's some actual code. And isn't it beautiful code? Great variable names, great structure here. Beautiful code. No, just kidding. So this code is, at a glance, is probably maybe difficult to understand, unless you've been doing technical interviews lately, in which case you may have been asked to write something like this. But these variable names are not bad. I wouldn't call them bad. what I would say is that these variable names are not very compassionate because they don't help other people reading your code understand what the code's trying to do. So compassionate variable naming means putting yourself in the shoes of the people who are going to be reading and maintaining your code and thinking, how do I make things less painful for them in the future? And for myself, since I might be one of those people reading the code in the future. So maybe these variable names are a little bit more compassionate. They may not be the best ones either, but you see, oh, it's bubble sort, right? Very useful algorithm. Very useful and very good way of determining whether someone's a good programmer in a technical interview. No, it's not. Anyway, but this is just an example to show that variable names that are more compassionate allow people to understand your code better and maintain it better. So on a very practical, very technical code level, compassion helps. Good variable naming requires compassion. And this principle applies on grander scales as well. When we're talking about refactoring code, designing APIs, selecting tools, designing our whole architecture, all of these decisions can be informed by compassion. You can say, okay, well, let me think about who's going to be using this code, what context they're going to be in, what choices will make their lives easier, and my life easier, since I'm probably going to be stuck with this code for a while as well. And so compassion can really apply on this very technical level. And in fact, I think that instead of just blindly following best practices, we think about minimizing suffering. So instead of just following a list of, oh, well, this is the right way to do this is the wrong way to do this, that's not idiomatic, thinking about why does it matter? And thinking about taking it all the way down to what humans are affected, because that's ultimately what matters. And if you can't find any reason, any human that's affected by it, then it probably doesn't matter, and you're probably nitpicking for no reason at all. So again, instead of following best practices, think about minimizing suffering. It's a much more practical way of approaching software development. So it affects how we actually write the code, how we design the code. Compassion also affects us personally. So I don't know about you, but even though I love to code, I get frustrated a lot when I'm coding. Sometimes I feel like I could throw my computer out the window. And in these moments when I'm frustrated, sometimes thoughts like these pass through my head. I'm such an idiot. It's all my fault. Or I'm a horrible person. That's if maybe I've done something mean. Now, these are not very helpful thoughts to have in our heads, but because the brain has a negativity bias, we have these very strong inner critics that are always criticizing what we're doing. And I would say that these are not productive or compassionate thoughts to have towards ourselves. We're not robots. We're not robots who are just meant to crank out code as efficiently as possible. We're human beings. We have emotions. We have egos. We have fears. We have concerns. And so it's important to recognize those, acknowledge those, and manage those. So I'm a big believer in the idea of self-compassion, which means that we don't talk harshly to ourselves. We don't call ourselves an idiot. We talk to ourselves as we would a good friend. If your friend broke the build or checked in some code that was broken, would you say, oh, you're such an idiot? Probably not, unless you're not a very good friend. So why do we talk that way to ourselves? And yet many of us do inside our heads. So self-compassion changes the way we talk to ourselves while we're coding, when we hit that roadblock, and that's where it can really help with resilience. It also affects how we collaborate and mentor. So collaboration and mentoring are skills that are widely neglected in tech because, again, we have this stereotype that you're just coding alone in a basement, so why should you have to know how to talk to people? But actually, we don't code alone in a basement so much anymore. We work together, whether we ever did. We work together to try to produce quality code on teams. And sometimes we bring on junior people that need mentoring, or senior people who are learning a new language and also need mentoring. And so we need to change how we talk to each other. I wrote this article, It's Time to Retire RTFM, because RTFM is the opposite of compassion. It means, read the flipping manual or something like that. And it's a lot of times used instead of answering someone's question. And when someone asks a question, they're probably suffering in some way with a problem. And to say RTFM shows no compassion for their suffering. Now, of course, yes, you deserve compassion too, and you don't have to answer everyone's question. but there's a balance there, and I explore all the details of that in that article. Things like, you're doing it wrong. This phrase is thrown around so easy in technology, like so frequently, and it's not compassionate at all, because again, this comes from this idea in the code where there is a clear right or wrong. But in the human world, whenever you introduce humans, there is no right or wrong. There's different people's perspectives, points of views, priorities, and so, to just blanketly say you're doing it wrong is not a very compassionate way to approach a disagreement. I see this a lot on Twitter, which has its own compassion problems, but in general, this is just not a very kind way to talk to people. So that's how compassion can affect in a very detailed way how we code. Compassion can also inform why we code. So if I asked, why do you code? I bet a good number of you in the room would say something similar to this. I want to solve interesting problems, or I like a challenge, or something like that. And I say that because I've interviewed tons of people, and I've interviewed myself, and I know that this is kind of the go-to thing to say is, oh yeah, I like solving problems, I like doing these things, which is probably true. I mean, there is a certain human joy that comes from figuring something out, and I feel that as well. However, I wonder if you can go deeper with your why. Why do you like coding? And my personal stance is that the only reason for technology to exist is to improve people's lives. And so, yeah, you can solve interesting problems doing a lot of different things, but a question to ask yourself is your work actually improving people's lives? And if not, why not? I mean, you're going to be using your time coding regardless, so if you can do it in any sort of way, why choose a way that's not improving people's lives if you could be improving people's lives? Just something to ask yourself. So how this plays out in the workplace, think about when you're talking with a product manager about prioritizing features, or a designer, or even a user if you're on that level of directly engaging with clients. Can you empathize with business people and understand their needs? And the product managers, can you understand what they need, or do you just want to use some fancy new technology for fun? Do you dismiss the non-technical people? Again, like I said, I don't like this term non-technical because I think everybody's technical. Even people, think about your accountants, right? They're doing a lot of calculations. Think about our marketers. So I've worked at a lot of startups where the marketing people were doing tons of complex sort of analytics behind the scenes, and I would say that that's a very technical thing. And so I've actually written this article, If You Can Use a Fork, You're Technical, and I make the case that technical just means having specialized skills, and everyone you're working with has specialized skills. If nothing else, they're probably able to use the fork. And so I would recommend checking that out to see why we need to stop calling people non-technical and defining them in this sort of negative way, and using it as an excuse not to listen to them. Similarly, do you call your users stupid, like those examples I showed earlier, or do you try to empathize with what they actually need? Because again, why are we building this stuff in the first place if we're not trying to help these users? So I've written more on this. User tests will make you a better developer, and I truly believe it's true, because user tests require you to sit and watch somebody struggling to use your product. And you can glean a lot of insights from that, and it can be really rewarding too to see somebody derive joy from using your product. So I highly recommend it. It was eye-opening for me the first time I did it. So you can think about whether your work is improving people's lives. You can also ask, is your work causing suffering? And this is, a tough question, but worth asking. So, a lot of drones these days are you doing not so great stuff and causing a lot of suffering. Some are going to be equipped with facial recognition technology and could be used to help identify people for crimes or to help execute people. And is this something that you really want to contribute to if you're working on the algorithms behind the scenes? Employees at Google recently stood up because they didn't like the fact that what the technology they were building was going to be used potentially in war scenarios potentially to kill people. And so it's something that's worth asking yourself with compassion, is my work going to hurt people? And am I okay with that? And sometimes it's very direct, like you're building technology that's going to kill people, and sometimes it's indirect. So, Twitter, I mentioned it earlier, there are a lot of hate groups still active on Twitter. Now, they've done some work to help rein this in, but it's still a problem. And when they're building something that just lets people tell each other what they're having for breakfast or what's going on, it's hard to think, is this going to have grand effects throughout the world and lead to violent scenarios and potentially war, if certain leaders keep using it as they are. And did Twitter ask these questions? Not really, not early on, because they were too excited about building this hot new technology and getting active users and all of this sort of stuff. And they didn't think about the suffering that their work could potentially cause. And these are important questions to ask yourself. So to return to the more positive framing here, how can your work improve people's lives? So think about what you can do on a daily basis. And it doesn't mean you have to quit your job and join a nonprofit. As I mentioned, my company is a for-profit, but I run it based on a set of values that are important to me. And so you can do the same. I think it's important to find your why. Why do you really code? Not just to solve problems. Okay, that can be part of it. And so can, providing for your family. That's important as well. But what legacy do you want to leave on the world? And, what technology do you want to build with your short time here? I think it's worth spending some time with that. To do that, you really do have to slow down because we're working so fast, we're trying to keep up with, put out fires and all these things. But we need to sometimes slow down and think about our actions and whether or not they're aligning with our values. So I would take some time and think carefully about what your personal core values are. Because, I think our values can shape every action we take every day. I try to reflect regularly on this question, am I living and working according to my own core values? And sometimes I'll look back at the week and I'll think, I was kind of rude to that person, and I value compassion, and I don't beat myself up over it, but I think, here's how I want to handle that situation differently in the future. And this ties into the idea of a growth mindset and continuous improvement. We don't want to beat ourselves up, but it is worth thinking, these are the things that matter to me. Am I actually living a life that's consistent with those things? That's actually how I ended up going vegan, because I took time. I was like, I love animals, and yet I contribute to their suffering. And so for me, it was out of alignment. And so now I became much happier when I brought those things into alignment. But it's an ongoing process, and that's why I encourage reflecting regularly on these topics. Okay, so compassion affects how we code, why we code. Finally, I want to talk about how compassion affects who we code with. So I mentioned the lack of diversity and that it bothers me. But I suspect from some Twitter exchanges with another speaker from this conference that perhaps it needs a little more explanation for people to actually care about this issue. So, are there diverse perspectives on your team, or does it look kind of like a subset of this conference, for example? And why does diversity matter? Well, you can find a ton of articles out there like this, why diverse teams are smarter, why they're more innovative. There's tons of studies to support this. They've been out for years. People mostly just ignore them because they're inconvenient. But the research is already out there. It's very clear that diverse teams are better in so many ways. We have concrete examples, like the fact that early crash test dummies were only shaped like sort of an average man, and so not like women and not like children. And so these cars were designed with that in mind, meaning that when these cars would actually get into crashes, women and children were hurt substantially more than an average-bodied man. Why? Because they had been tested for. And so women and children were actually dying because they wouldn't include more diverse perspectives on the team when designing these cars and working with these dummies. Now, that's still in the engineering world, but specifically in the code world, to return to Twitter here, one of the Twitter co-founders said that if he'd had a more diverse, I'm just going to keep going, that if he had a more diverse team at the beginning, that they might have thought ahead about all of the potential abuses of Twitter, because women, knew about how they might be harassed and whatnot, and so they were on the team. They might think, I have this ex that is always stalking me, and he may be able to use Twitter in these ways to harass me, or a lot of times I get these inappropriate messages from men, and how is Twitter going to handle that? But they didn't have women at the table. And so, the product suffered. So, you can find all of these articles about the various benefits of diversity, but I just want to point out that those aside, the reason we don't have diversity is injustice. We have barriers that are keeping people from being in the room when they should. And I'll get into more details on that, but opposing injustice is ethical and compassionate. So yes, diversity will improve the bottom line, but that's not the only reason you should care about it. Care about diversity because it's the ethical and compassionate thing to do, to break down these barriers and to give people equal opportunities as much as possible. I know it's very convenient to think women just don't like coding. That's why there aren't more women in this room. That's why there's not more women in tech. And let me tell you, as a woman in tech who talks to tons of women in tech across the world, it's just not true. Women do like coding. Young girls do like coding. Coding is not just about coding alone in a basement. In fact, sometimes people are motivated for different reasons to code. The reason we don't see more women in technology is more things like this. Harassment, which I have faced myself, especially online, since now I have a following online, and so people, I've been attacked on 4chan for, when I was criticizing Stack Overflow. Stereotypes. So, if the only person you ever see is in the media of what makes a coder, and it's some, guy in a hoodie coding alone in his basement, then that's going to be discouraging. We have issues like unconscious bias, which, means that when you see somebody come in, like you see me come up here, actually, I'll use this. When I was walking around to the vendors yesterday, I could immediately tell when I was wearing a dress, I look younger than I am, and they would say things like, oh, are you a developer? There was sort of, which, is nicer that they asked, but at a lot of conferences, people will assume I'm not a developer because I'm a woman in a dress, and if they do find out I'm a developer, they assume I'm a junior developer because I look a little bit younger than I actually am. And these are all unconscious bias. It's applying this pattern matching in your brain of who is a programmer, what a senior programmer looks like and talks like and acts like. And these are problems that women face when they're trying to get promotions, when they're trying to get hired, and this is holding women back. And also exclusionary language, and I'll talk in more detail about what that means in a minute. So, I'm not making this stuff up. Again, the data is out there. People just like to ignore it. There was a survey done of senior women in tech with 10 or more years of experience. 60% said they have experienced unwanted sexual advances. 90% have witnessed sexist behavior at company offsites and or industry conferences. 90%. So this is a serious problem. Now, if you're not a woman in tech or not in a minority group, you might think, I don't know, I think this is all exaggeration. I don't get what the big deal is about diversity and inclusion. So I learned recently about this thought experiment, the PETRIE multiplier, and it was created by a woman, PETRIE. And she said to imagine a room where there's the ratio of women to men is 1 to 4. So women are in, the minority there. And if each person in the room is equally likely to make an inappropriate remark to the opposite gender, there are 4 times as many men to make these remarks, and there are 4 times fewer women to receive them. So what happens is there's a multiplying effect here, and women end up getting 16 times as many inappropriate remarks as men. And this is assuming that both groups are equally, sexist or equally likely to make an inappropriate remark. So if you think the women around you are just, exaggerating or being too sensitive, they've probably experienced 16 times the level of abuse that you have potentially as a man. And a lot of times women don't talk about the harassment they see because if they do, and I know this from doing it myself, you're seen as a whiner or you're too sensitive or you're complaining too much. And so even women who do experience it don't always feel comfortable talking about it. And so, women are not exaggerating here. Like this is a serious issue. So, I mentioned unconscious bias. This ties into the idea that there really is no meritocracy. Now, we like to think we have this utopia of meritocracy in tech. It's only about how good you are at coding, and it's just not true. In fact, quite the opposite. There are studies that show that that top one there says that managers who believe themselves to be fair and objective judges of ability often overlook women and minorities who are deserving of job offers and pay measures. So, and there's another article there that confirms that. And so I recommend, diving into this research and understanding that the meritocracy really is a myth. Kara Swisher, who is a journalist and writer in America who writes a lot about Silicon Valley, says that it's not a meritocracy, it's a mirrorocracy, meaning that we hire people who look like us. And again, in tech, that means those people who don't like people, who like, instead coding in the basement, keep hiring that same mold. And that's why we get copies and copies, clones and clones. And we're all biased, me included. I know that if I meet somebody who reminds me of my younger self or something, I think, oh, she seems really cool or something like that. We all have these biases, and so we can never get rid of them. It's more about understanding them and working with them. Now, to get to the exclusionary language, my favorite example to talk about is, hey guys, so I'm not a guy, and when I hear, sometimes people say, oh, the compassionate coding guys, and I'm like, there are no guys with compassionate coding. So, I don't know who you're talking to, but you're not talking to me. Because, guys is not actually gender neutral. And there's a long history of where the term comes from. So I recommend reading this article written by a man, Jack Danger, and he has a linguistics degree and approaches it from that level and talks about the origins of this term. Now, I know from a language perspective, there might be other terms that may be more relevant to you. But this is one that I hear, throughout, anywhere I travel really, is this use of guys. And it makes you feel excluded. Because for example, if I said, can all the guys in the room stand up? It's very clear who I'm talking to. And so, I think it's just better to avoid using that term to avoid making people feel excluded. So that's an example of exclusionary language. And again, if you're thinking, I think it's a fine term, and the women I know don't care, I really recommend reading this article, because it'll probably cover all your points there. So compassion, when it comes to who we're working with, means staying humble. It means being willing to admit, oh, I messed up. And I do that too. I say something inappropriate, I apologize, I learn from it, and I try to move on. But I have to be humble to do that. A lot of times if somebody calls out your behavior, points out how it's problematic, don't dig your heels in and stand your ground, because that's just your ego, and it ends up making you look worse, and it causes more suffering, and that's not compassionate. Compassionate means being an ally against harassment. So it's not enough to just say, well, I'm not sexist or racist, so I'm fine. You really have to be, if you really want to change things here, it requires being an ally, standing up when you see inappropriate behavior, challenging your friends when they make inappropriate comments about women, about other minorities in tech, other underrepresented groups. It also means challenging stereotypes. So when someone says, oh yeah, all programmers, they don't know how to talk to people, like I did jokingly earlier, challenge that, say, well, I'm not sure. I remember when I graduated college, someone said, you can't trust a programmer with a tan, because it meant that they weren't spending enough time indoors coding, which is really problematic and shows just how disturbing some of these stereotypes can be. Acknowledging and combating bias. So like I said, we're all biased. It doesn't make us bad people. It's about understanding it and working with it and trying to overcome it and mitigate it. Using inclusive language, so be open to changing your habits. I mean, if we can all remember to put semicolons certain places and braces certain places, I think we can learn how to use different language from guys, for example. And also educating yourself. So a lot of times when people first hear about these things, how to be more compassionate and inclusive, they start asking questions of the women or the minorities on their team, and it puts a lot of undue emotional pressure on those specific people. And then they feel like, in addition to just trying to do their job, they also have to be like the ambassador to, all underrepresented groups. And it's overwhelming. And so sometimes people see me on Twitter, I'm just like, not today. Today I'm not going to teach Diversity 101 for free to some random guy on Twitter who's being rude to me. Sometimes it's just not. So, if you really want to be compassionate here, as an ally, as somebody from the overrepresented group, educate yourself. You know how to solve coding problems by Googling it. Google this stuff. Google what's appropriate. Google these issues. I'll be putting these slides up, so you'll be able to check out some of these resources. So again, compassion can really affect every decision we make every day. How we code, why we code, who we code with. We often ask in our tech teams, what's the efficient choice? What's the lean choice? What's the agile choice? And I would like to add to this mix something to ask ourselves on a regular, ongoing basis. What's the compassionate choice? For ourselves, for our users, for our coworkers, for the world. I love this quote by Karen Armstrong, and I think it's really relevant in tech. If it is not tempered by compassion and empathy, reason can lead men and women into a moral void. And I think this is what we have in tech. We've been so obsessed with the reason and the logic, and we've completely ignored the human side, compassion and empathy. And it's time to rectify that, to improve the technology we're building and to improve our own lives. So if nothing else, please remember, compassion is not a soft skill. I don't think that's a helpful term. I find that compassion is a catalytic skill. It helps us apply our other skills more effectively, and it just helps us be more effective and productive and happier in our jobs. So I know I may not have convinced all of you today, but I hope that I've planted some seeds to get your mind thinking about these issues. I know that sometimes it takes some time. Somebody sent me a direct message in March of last year. Women are underrepresented in tech because they choose not to participate. They choose a different career. A few months later, same person, sorry, was quite wrong back then, have realized since that there are other factors in play. So people's minds do open, hearts do open, things change. It just sometimes takes some time. So with that, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thanks for having me.